only be able to highlight a few key observations. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to pause, or I would have to move as a bullet train. There are many other interesting details which we hope that we are going to present in the post-Congress publication. So now look into the survey. As May just mentioned, the survey has been helpfully sent by HKIAC to its arbitrators on the panel on the list who indicate that they can handle arbitration both in English and Chinese. Luckily, we received 70 responses. So we first look at their native language. Over 50% say that their native language is Chinese. About 30% are native English speakers. 10% say that they're native in both English and Chinese. And there are also a few who said that their native language is actually a third language. And this percentage composition is broadly consistent with what we observe here in real-life experiences. Most of our questions are designed around two scenarios. Scenario one is what we call formal bilingual arbitration. That is where the arbitration agreement or the procedure order provides that the official or procedure language of the arbitration is both English and Chinese. As Sama has just mentioned, according to HKIAC's statistics, in recent years, roughly, I think between 2 and 5% of the cases are of this type. Scenario two is what we call informal bilingual arbitration. That is where, even though the agreement provides for only one procedure language, most often English, but there are a lot of evidence or witnesses are giving their evidence in Chinese. Although there's no official statistics, but in our experiences, scenario two is much more often seen in real life than scenario one. So just to warm up, look at some of the high-level points. The first group of questions are around witness statements and expert report. We asked the respondents when they are presented in witness statements or expert report, which is written in one language, but with translation into another language, which language version will have more impact on them. One thing to note is that in the question for scenario one, we didn't specify the original language in which the statement or the report is written. That probably explains why most of the respondents say that their answer will be depends on the original language. And in question two, having more specific, we say that the original language of the statement or report is Chinese, and English translation is provided. And in this scenario, more than half of the respondents say that they will be more influenced by the original Chinese version. And the pattern of different native language groups are also different. Those whose native language is or includes Chinese clearly gives more weight to the original Chinese version, which is not surprising. Similarly, we also look at the same question for documentary exhibits. And the pattern of the answers is broadly similar to the first group questions on witness statement or expert report. But one notable difference is that under scenario two, more native English speakers, as compared with the question dealing with witness statement or expert report, say that they are more willing to give higher weight to the original Chinese version instead of the English translation. The third group questions are around witness oral testimony at a hearing. So the fact pattern is that a witness is going to testify in Chinese, of course, with English interpretation. We ask the respondent to rank 4 things by their relative influence on their decision-making process. The 4 things are the live testimony in Chinese, the live interpretation at the hearing, the Chinese transcript, and the English transcript. No matter whether in scenario 1, which is formal bilingual arbitration, or scenario 2, where the procedure language is English only, the top ranked choice is largely the same. Roughly same number of respondents say that it's more than 80% of them say that they will give most weight to the original Chinese testimony. A small difference between the two scenarios is that in scenario 2, when the official language is English only, respondents seem to be more comfortable to give slightly more weight to the English version, either the live interpretation or the transcript. And we also set out the different patterns of different native language group, and they are also roughly in line with the expectation. Our next question is about, our next question only arises in scenario 1, which is formal bilingual arbitration. We ask the respondents whether, of course, we see a lot of discussions about like how costly and expensive and inefficient bilingual arbitration could be. So we ask the respondents whether they will consider to proactively make any suggestions to the parties to slightly or significantly deviate from the arbitration agreement to make the proceedings more efficient. Among the 70 respondents, only one respondent said that he or she would not make any proactive suggestion at all. All the other, of course, for this question, we asked the respondents to choose all the suggestions they will consider to make to the parties, so without like limiting the numbers. And we can see that for every suggestion we list out here, over 50% of the respondents indicate that they will choose to make them. And this even includes the most extreme one, to suggest to the parties to change the, to basically amend the arbitration agreement, change the bilingual agreement to a single language arbitration. And we can see that the top 3 popular choices here that, number 1, agree to try to convince the parties to agree that the word is only written in one language. Of course, it's for the purpose of relieving the burden of the tribunal, but of course there will be also concerns that there will be inconsistency between the two languages, which may cause issue in the enforcement stage. And similarly, the second top choice is to agree that the tribunal's procedure order, directions, and correspondence be written in only one language. And third choice, coming very close, is to agree that the documentary exhibits, which is originally written in one procedure language, need not to be translated into another language. Our next group of questions, probably the most complicated, but it's a very interesting one. So I'll explain the fact pattern a bit. This is in the context of scenario 2, where the only procedure language is English. And here, the witness speak only Chinese or prefer to testify in Chinese. And of course, interpretation will be arranged in that situation. Normally, the expectation is that the counsel will do the cross-examination in English, which is a procedure language. But here, the party not presenting the evidence say that they want to do the cross-examination in Chinese instead. And of course, there will be English interpretation or translation of the questions as well. And this is objected by the party presenting the witness. And here we set out for each party 3 major arguments they're going to make and ask our arbitrators to pick up the top 3 which they find most convincing and powerful. And as we can see, while some of the arguments are more popular or convincing than others, none of them seem to be predominant. So the highest, like the most often chosen one is just slightly over 50%. We first look at the applying counsel side. The most impactful argument found by the tribunal is that it is important to ensure that the witness fully and accurately understand the contents of the question asked by the counsel in a native language, because the interpretation can never be accurate. 50% of the arbitrators pick up this among the top 3. The other 2 arguments are less favored. One is that it is important to ensure that witnesses fully understand the tone of the questions, which will also be missed out in the interpretation. Although we use a tone here, but as Zhengfei has shown out, there can be also nonverbal thing in the questioning, but it seems that not many arbitrators give the most weight to this reasoning. And another one is about sort of equality or equal treatment among the counsel. Here we say if the applying counsel say that my native language is in Chinese, I should be allowed to cross-examine in the language I'm most comfortable with. And although the procedure language is English, the parties have the right to choose the counsel they wish, so I should be allowed, I shouldn't be excluded simply because my native language is not English. Similarly, this is not the most popular or convincing to the tribunal. On the opposing counsel side, the most impactful argument is that the arbitration agreements provide that the language of the arbitration is English. So this means that the counsel should speak English by default. Slightly over 50% of the arbitrators pick up these arguments as very convincing. The other two arguments carry slightly less weight, but also quite chosen often. One is looking at the opposing counsel's linguistic capability. The argument is that the opposing counsel's native language is not Chinese, or they can simply not understand Chinese. This means that allowing the counsel on the other side to ask questions in Chinese will undermine the opposing counsel's ability to object. And similarly, there will be arguments that if some of the arbitrator's native language is not Chinese, then their ability to intervene will also be undermined if the applying counsel is allowed to ask questions in Chinese. Of course, those arguments will carry more weight if the interpretation is simultaneous rather than consecutive, because there will be limited time for them to think and respond. After showing all these arguments on both sides to the tribunals, we then ask the tribunal members whether they will grant or deny the application. We see that in the argument side, it seems that the opposing counsel's arguments receive slightly more popularity than the applying counsel side. But slightly surprisingly, when we look at the final decision of the tribunal members, there will be more respondents agreeing to grant the application rather than to deny them. Of course, I will be interested in hearing others' view why this happened, but my own guess is that the argument to ensure that the contents of the question is fully understood is so predominantly influence who really give weight to this question. We also look at the pattern of the different native language groups. As expected, native Chinese-speaking arbitrators are most likely to grant the application. Interestingly, all arbitrators whose native language is a third language decide to deny the application. And in contrast, among the native English-speaking arbitrators, only 30% of them deny the application. So our final group of questions deal with a different scenario. We call it scenario 3. That is where the transaction documents are written in both English and Chinese, but do not specify which language will prevail, and do not say which language will be the language for the arbitration. So it is up to the institution and or the tribunal to make a procedure direction which language will be the procedure language of the arbitration. And here we list out several factors the tribunal may consider, and we invite the respondents to indicate the top 3 of them, which they find most relevant. And among those, as we can see, 4 of the factors stand out. Number 1 is the language of most of the documentary exhibit. Number 2 is the native language of the parties. Number 3 is the official language of the substantive governing law. Number 4, which is slightly overlapping with number 1, which is the language of the parties' daily correspondence. Having set out all these factors, we then ask the arbitrators what decision they're going to make on the procedure language of the arbitration. A vast majority of the arbitrators say that they will adopt a hybrid approach, which is that they will allow some aspect of the arbitration be conducted in one language, but some other aspect to be either conducted in another language or in bilingual format. Among others, more prefer single language arbitration over bilingual arbitration, which apparently will be more time-consuming and cost-consuming. Again, we look at the pattern of different native language groups, and there are some interesting observations. First of all arbitrators whose native language is a third language, again, act consistently. They all say that they will choose to do single language arbitration. In contrast, none of the arbitrators who is native in both English and Chinese choose single language arbitration. They may choose hybrid, they may choose bilingual, but they don't choose single language arbitration. And the patterns of native English-speaking arbitrators and Chinese-speaking arbitrators are quite similar. A lot of information, but in the interest of time, I'll just pause here and also interested in hearing others' views. Thank you.